Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today it's time for the good year-end list, the top 10 best albums of 2019. Alright, 2019 was an interesting year for electronic music. For about 8-9 months straight, I was ready to call this one of the weakest years for the genre since 2015. It was just so dry and so few albums I found really worth celebrating or dropping. There was a shocking shortage of 8 out of 10 material for quite a long time. Until right at the end of the year when suddenly all the great stuff just came flooding in all at once, as if to make up for lost time. And it turned out to be a pretty alright year for electronic music, all things considered. It's not the strongest year for the genre, certainly not on the level of 2010, 2016, or freaking 2013. But it was not a bad year at all either. I was pretty satisfied with what we got. Solid mix of some of the usual suspects for my list, as well as quite a few fresh faces and surprises. A lot of names here I was familiar with previously to whatever extent, but wouldn't have expected them to put out material as good as they did. And some that I was sure were going to be shoo-ins ended up not showing up here. Like 808 State and Amon Tobin's comebacks just missed the cut, for instance. Both really good and worth checking out, there was just a stronger competition. And heck, even some of the albums that didn't hit the 8 out of 10 level when they came out ended up growing on me and will show up on this list. The numerical scores I gave out in my proper reviews did not play into where I finally ranked these albums. A lot of factors went into it. I did weigh it much more on replay value than previous years, whatever I happen to feel more inclined to want to come back to at the moment, what brought me in for the most repeat listens, and all the usual other factors. Basically, it's all just my opinion, you can feel free to disagree with it. And I keep this list relegated to just electronic music, because that's what my channel is all about. You know the deal by now. Here's the obligatory joke where I pretend the album I came out with myself this past August is actually my #1 pick or something like that. Yeah, so let's get into it. This is the top 10 best albums of 2019. So before we begin the list proper, here is a bunch of honorable mentions. Honorable mention number 1, Blue Tech, Holotrope. Well, this wasn't exactly an album that really caught me off guard or delivered something I've never heard before. If you've never checked out Blue Tech stuff before, Holotrope is as good a place to start as any, because while also adhering to the usual sound you'd expect out of him, it does really capture a lot of the versatility and various styles that he has in his tool belt, and does them all pretty well. Also, just structurally, this was pretty interesting in how it's broken up into 4 continuously flowing movements, and the way he links them together was pretty cool. It's some nice stuff. Give it a shot. Honorable mention number 2, Plaid, Polymer. The new Plaid album was a Plaid album, that's for sure. Hasn't really grown or shrunk on me since I reviewed it, got plenty of variety, shows them doing the kinds of sounds they've always done well. Still don't think it's quite as strong as The Digging Remedy, but I had a lot of fun with it in the same way I have fun with all Plaid albums. It was one of the big bright spots from the first half of this year. You could say it's predictable coming from them, but their style has always been so multi-dimensional and interesting that they can get away with another more the same album in my eyes. This was good stuff. Honorable mention number 3, DJ Shadow, Our Pathetic Age.
Mental, are you ready? Ready, set, jump to the rhythm as hard as you can go. Keep it steady.
Speaking of more of the same albums, that in itself may have been what kept this album off the list proper, that and the kind of old head attitude permeating through much of the second disc. But like I said in my review, it's not nearly as cringeworthy or out of touch as that album cover might have you believe. For a double album, this thing shoots by, and was really easy to come back to and re-listen to from start to finish. The first disc with all his electronic experimentations was a ton of fun from start to end, and the second disc with the absolute avalanche of guest rappers had plenty of insightful commentary on modern society and hard-hitting beats and performances. Maybe a couple of weak spots here and there. Some tracks in the second half did kinda miss the mark for me. But as a whole, this is an album that carries the mood of the world pretty well and feels realistic about everything, presents it in such a way that is easily recognizable as DJ Shadow, and really hit the spot here at the end of the year. Good stuff. Honorable mention number 4, M83 Digital Shades Volume 2. This one got a lot more replay value than I would have expected. It didn't make the list proper because in order to get the best listening experience out of it, I just removed 4 tracks from my iPod that felt like they were redundant and weighing the experience down. But the entire thing improved immensely as a result. Maybe it's because I'm kind of a sucker for this kind of laid-back soundtrack-y material, but this got quite a bit of mileage, and I couldn't go through this list without at least mentioning it. It's really freaking good. Honorable mention number 5, Sounds from the Ground, Binary. Binary is admittedly still one of my least favorite projects from these guys. I still think they played it safe and weren't quite as inventive or striking as on other albums of theirs, but not to say this one didn't keep me coming back and growing on me, as every project of theirs seems to be able to. I found this was a really good summer album. For those days when it's really warm out and I didn't feel like doing much, I could put this album on and it would do a good job of cooling me off. I also weirdly kept putting it on every time I went to the grocery store. Not sure why that became a thing for me, but that's what happened. Got a fair bit of replay value out of it that way. Still really nice stuff, and as always, looking forward to wherever SFTG plan on taking their sound next. Honorable mention number 6, Shifo, Proof of Concept. I wonder if this album hadn't shown up right around the same time as that SFTG album and fulfilled my taste for some subtle and kinda chilled out but still groove-heavy techno, then the SFTG album might have landed with more impact for me. I don't know. But yeah, this album was really solid and provided plenty of reasons for me to come back to it. It's not the most unique sounding album out there, but it's got effective atmosphere building, it still gets my foot tapping the whole way through, it's got enough variety to keep me interested the whole time. It's a pretty promising debut album from this guy. I'm excited to see what he does next. Honorable mention number 7, Anna Meredith, Fibs. This was probably the most painful cut I had to make. It's my number 11 pick, basically. Ultimately, it got the shaft because personal enjoyment-wise, it's a little inconsistent for me. Some moments just hit me way more than others. And on the whole, there were other albums that I had more of an urge to come back to after I put my review up. This one just kind of fell by the wayside. But man, if the best moments on here don't still absolutely kick ass, from the peppy and energetic synth-pop earworm of Killjoy, to the hard-hitting straight instrumental rock of Limpet, to the slow-building and dramatic ambient tones of Moon Moons, to the absolute insanity of Paramore, which I can't even begin to describe in a short segment like this. And it's all super well produced, and Anna Meredith has a really well-defined musical identity, and this is absolutely good enough to make the list proper. It basically just came down to personal preference. Definitely make sure you check it out regardless. Honorable mention number 8, Bibio, Ribbons. And Bibio. This one didn't make the list because I felt like I was pushing it too much by calling this album electronic. Because there's barely any electronic elements on this album at all. Maybe sampling here and there, I guess. But for the most part, it's a warm, fuzzy, nostalgic folk album with lots of acoustic guitar pieces and other stuff in the same stylistic ballpark. As such, it didn't get a proper review, but instead a quick video of me raving about it in the car about how fantastic it is from start to finish. If not for limiting my channel to one genre, this absolutely would have been on the list. I don't think Ribbons is quite as strong or consistent as his 2013 album, Silver Wilkinson. That one's also much more electronic. But this one I think has higher high points. Tracks like Curls and Old Graffiti and Patchouli May, and this one I don't feel like trying to pronounce. But especially Before. That track is probably my favorite track Bibio's ever made to date. Absolutely do not miss this one either. You want an album that'll warm up your winter, this will do the trick. So yeah, those are the honorable mentions. Onto the list proper. Number 10. Biosphere, the Senja recordings. This was one of the biggest surprises of the year. I spent much of 2019 going through the back catalog of Georg Jensen and letting out every opinion I've ever had on his music in video form. And one of the results of the discography review is that I felt like most of the material he's put out in this decade hasn't really been up to par with the stuff he did in his prime through the 90s and 2000s. A lot of it was minimalistic to the point of being quite boring, and this project, like all his others, is also very minimalistic, but it was far more engaging and memorable than his last couple. Any given track may not have anything more to it than sparse synth melodies or field recordings, but they're paced so that no sound overstays its welcome. There's plenty of sonic variety, yet still forming a cohesive atmosphere and a palpable sense of environment. That's always been Biosphere's biggest strength. It's a very dark and spooky album, feels like it takes place in some area of Norway that used to be next to a glacier but isn't anymore because climate change. It has both warmness to it and a coolness to it at the same time. I don't feel like a short preview of one song can truly do it justice. It demands to be digested all in one sitting, and preferably at night when no one is around. Ended up returning to this one quite a bit after my review. Really nice to have. Make sure you give it a shot too. Number 9. Vale Smith, Origami. Yeah, this one got more replay value than I would have expected. Came from a fellow YouTube reviewer, Buffalo Staple, delivering an interesting blend of abstract and experimental material that has elements of trap, future bass, wonky, deconstructed club, whatever you want to call this kind of stuff. And it just managed to hit that sweet spot for me of being experimental in a way that could pull me in and keep me interested, but not so far out there that end up pushing me away. You have moments that are hard-hitting, loud and abrasive, going up against other moments that are more subdued and melodic and atmospheric, coming together in a way that he made his own. He definitely has a sound that I could recognize from a distance, and this album in particular was a cohesive and well-paced listen that was never boring. I've also heard his other material outside of this project, and it all sounds pretty similar to the stuff he did here, to the point of me not having much to say about it. If you're interested, his Tame Your Wild Garden EP from earlier this year worked in all the same ways this album did, and is similarly really enjoyable. But yeah, I came to this album quite a bit over the course of 2019. It's really solid stuff. Don't sleep on it. Number 8. Flying Lotus, Flamagra. I suppose this is going to be a bit of a contentious pick that I don't expect everyone to agree with me on. A lot of people consider it a disappointing letdown from an artist who's delivered more creative and out-of-the-box material before and was now just retreading past success. I don't know what to tell you. It may be similar to previous albums of his, but dang if he didn't create a wild, vibrant, and consistently engaging listening experience for me all the same. He works in so many guest appearances that each bring their own unique flavor to their respective tracks, be it Denzel Curry, or Tierra Whack, or George Clinton, or Anderson .Paak, or David Lynch, and all the rest of them. He walks through several different sound sketches that usually have this kind of old school funk and soul vibe to them, but all fit together in this cohesive mold, and give the whole album a sense of place that can be warm and calming or crazy and chaotic, fitting with the loose fire-themed concept he brought the whole thing together with. I mean, given how it's 27 tracks stretching a little over an hour, not every moment is a winner, but there's not a single one that I ever felt like skipping, and the experience as a whole was well executed enough that I kept feeling compelled to come back to it more and more over the course of the year. People have also said it was too long, and like I said in my review, I flat disagree with that. I think people were just spoiled by the super concise lengths of his previous albums. This did not overstay its welcome for me. If it was a letdown for you, oh well, you're lost, but it wasn't a letdown for me. This one stuck out in my mind this year, and it still holds up coming back to it at the end of the year, and my various revisits in between. Great stuff. Number 7. BT. Everything you're searching for is on the other side of fear. Yeah, this one. I guess this one might be ranked lower than you'd expect it to be. I definitely scored this one a bit too high in my review the other day, and kinda wanted to pull it down some almost immediately after uploading it. But I stand by everything I said in the actual video. The thing about this album is that it's not an exciting listen. It's pretty off the beaten path for BT, who's always made his albums feel like big flashy events, but also hits such a strange note for me that none of his other projects do. It's so much more subtle and stripped back than his other stuff. So many tracks here that are nothing more than solo piano pieces or pure orchestral compositions, while still also working in some of his fun experimental beats that I've always loved from him. And it is such a lonely, depressing listen, the kind of thing that you'd probably need to be in the right mood to get the most out of. But I stand by that mood being really well executed. It's the album that brings me down anytime I put it on and gets me in that mood by itself. Even the more energetic tracks like Orthogonal just have this strong, tangible undercurrent of sadness to them, and I never get that out of BT. His music is usually a lot more uplifting, and this is not that. But in a good way. Sure, there's a couple of stretches of tracks that aren't that interesting, especially near the beginning, but it's amazingly well produced across the board as I'd expect out of him, bringing the kind of instrumental muscle he would bring to his film soundtracks. And for such a sad-sounding main studio album to come out of BT is pretty refreshing. It may not have hit me in the way I expected it to. It is so minimalistic, so subtle and understated, none of which are qualities that apply to most BT albums. But that makes it one of the most unique and memorable projects in his catalog so far, really closing out the year with an unexpected left hook. Don't sleep on this. Or do, it's a nice album to fall asleep to as well, but you know what I mean. Number 6. Coma Duster, Darker Matter. I am really glad I got to hear this album a whole week before its release, because I don't think this would have had quite the same impact if I didn't have that extra prep time. Darker Matter is an album that required a lot of time to grow on me and for me to familiarize... Darker Matter is an album that required a lot of time to grow on me and for me to familiarize myself with its various intricacies. At its core, it may sound basically the same as its previous two albums, and I was initially let down by it in that way, but as I kept listening to it, it kept revealing so many new layers to it and interesting things that I didn't notice before. Tracks that were once forgettable or unpleasant and I might have wanted to skip before became catchier and more easily identifiable from a distance, and less skippable. And it's also worth noting that this is also the most stylistically diverse album of his to date. While it does mostly stick to his usual blend of IDM and industrial and metal and all the rest of it, he does also bring in plenty of ambient side tracks, propulsive drum and bass moments, even a couple of folksier acoustic tracks. Tracks that are really abstract and complex, and tracks that are really simple and stripped back. And it keeps getting better and better with every listen. It is an intense and challenging listen, as you'd expect if you're familiar with his previous work. If you've never heard any Coma Duster album before, I would still more highly recommend his previous two albums, Hollow Worlds and Solace. The former is a good proof of concept starting point, and the latter is still his best work for me. But this album was also his most challenging and most rewarding with repeat listens. And yeah, it's great. I've grown to love the whole experience from start to finish and feel like it's up to par with his other two. Again, don't sleep on this one. The more time spent with it, the better. Number 5. Matmos, Plastic Anniversary. Not gonna lie, it is pretty unusual for a long-running outfit like Matmos to come out with their 10th studio album 25 years into their career, and it turns out to be their best album overall. And yeah, I stand by that. Plastic Anniversary is their best album. Now, I've always felt Matmos are one of the most creative names in electronic music, or in music period, and their constant attempts to make music out of things you'd never expect to work as music, like samples of Surgery or Washing Machine. Super out-of-the-box stuff, but a lot of their stuff felt kinda gimmicky to me. Like, the actual music they were playing came secondary to the unconventional methods they went about making it all. Plastic Anniversary is no less weird and creative as their previous best work, made entirely out of samples from things made out of plastic, from billiard balls to riot shields to Lego bricks, to breast implants and flutes and horns made out of PVC pipes. you name it. But this album is their best because on top of that creativity, they turned all of these sounds into compelling music and sound design that I willingly wanted to come back to and re-listen to. They made good tunes out of it that had plenty of personality and detail and even emotional value. Hit a similar note that something like Orbital's The Altogether normally would with all its off-the-wall craziness and catchy tunes. More off the wall and less catchy than that album, but you know. There may have been other albums that came out this year that got more replay value, both higher and lower on this list, but there is absolutely nothing out there that exists like Plastic Anniversary. This is a monumental accomplishment for these mainstays of experimental music, and even if they wouldn't normally be your thing, I think this is seriously worth a shot. Fantastic album. Number 4. Patricia Texan, Picks and Bits. Speaking of artists putting out their best work fairly late in their career, well, okay, Patricia Texan has only been putting out stuff since 2015. She hasn't been around that long, but it kind of feels like she's been around a lot longer because she's been so prolific. This is her 42nd release to date. I've heard all her previous work over the years since discovering her 2 years ago with her Winter Beats album, and she's had so much variety in her back catalog and experimenting and evolving and slowly improving her sound design and production, going from obvious bedroom producer who didn't really know what he was doing to this. An EDM album that's better than most EDM albums I hear out of actual established festival headlining artists. A big part of it is that she just brings a lot more personality and flair to her stuff than most big EDM artists. Weird time signatures and odd grooves all over the place, playful synth-pop numbers that get stuck in your head super easily, emulations of common EDM tropes done better, be it a big room house drop acting as actual satisfying payoff, huge expansive Porter Robinson-esque productions. There's even a track that would have made sense coming out of Lindsey Sterling, but is catchier than anything she's ever done. There's tracks that have like multiple phases to them too, like 9 Stars and Catch These Hands. There's even an 11-minute straight experimental noise piece, Birdsong. Well, the first 3 minutes are just straight noise. After that, it brings in a bit more melody, and it is absolutely glorious. Not to mention, this album is like 70 minutes long and it zips by super quickly. While it might not be the most creative entry on this list, it is one of the most fun to listen to, and I've just loved coming back to this one over and over, and I imagine this one's really going to be sticking with me in the long term. Can't wait to see where she'll end up next year. I hear she's going to be releasing an Oudeker-inspired IDM album on New Year's. Looking forward to that. But yeah, Picks and Bit is excellent. Give it a shot. Number 3. Underworld, Drift Series 1. So this was a weird one to quantify because this album isn't really an album. It's a 6-hour box set of 5 EPs released throughout the course of 2019 and reorganized over 6 CDs and with several bonus tracks added. If you had told me at the beginning of this year that Underworld of all people would be dropping 6 hours of music in 1 year and somehow justify all of its existence to the point of me wanting to drop $100 on getting the whole series in physical form here, I would have laughed and then been seriously freaked out at such a prospect. I would have been like, fuck you, I'm not listening to that. Because Underworld are not the world's most versatile band. Their stuff tends to get pretty repetitive, their track record is far from spotless. They had 4 great albums in the 90s and 2002, and kind of slid off after that with subsequent releases being fine, but nothing particularly special. And you're talking to someone who's already endured Oudeker's Elsek 1 through 5 and NTS sessions. Those were way too much coming from a band with more musical depth and evolution than these guys. 6 hours of Underworld would have been such a scary idea, and I'm still iffy about their announcement to do this all over again next year. I'm not sure if this is a trick they can pull off twice, but my god. There was so much good stuff that came out of Drift, I'm not opposed to listening to the entire box set all the way through again. There is nothing outright bad in Drift. The worst song was a 1.5-minute demo that felt unfinished, and everything else was at least good. And the best stuff on here is legit on par with the stuff they were putting out in their prime in the 90s. Tracks that go on really long but don't overstay their welcome, exploring every facet of their style over the years from the hard-hitting propulsive anthemic techno beats they're known for. See Another Silent Way, Border Country, Listen to Their No, and Threat of Rain, to more subtle and down-tempo numbers that still sound pretty cool and are often really catchy and emotionally potent. See Apple Shine, Poet Cat, Custard Speed Talk, or Altitude Dub. To other weird stuff that doesn't sound like anything they've done before, see Star, Sonia Mode, or Hundredweight Hammer, or their jazz-heavy collaborations with the Necks. Most notably, the 47-minute Apple Shine Continuum, which may very well be my favorite thing Underworld have ever released, right up there with Juanita, Kiteless to Dream of Love, and 2 Months Off. This incredible, slow-evolving track that starts out with the hard-hitting but subtle melodic techno beats and slowly getting jazzier as it goes on, and by the last 10 minutes is melted into pure freeform piano and cello and bass. It is absolutely freaking gorgeous. 47-minute piece that kept me coming back this frequently, justified every second of its running time. My freaking god. I'm probably never going to sit through Drift Series 1 all in one sitting. I tried doing something like that before the box set release, and I was definitely sick of Underworld by the end. But it wasn't even that bad. And I did put together a 2.5 hour mix of my favorite tracks from the series that makes a full listening experience, in my opinion, on par with the albums from the Darren Emerson days, and doesn't overstay its welcome, and that I've been coming to a lot more frequently. Yeah, 2019 has made me more of an Underworld fan than I've ever been before, and Drift Series 1 is an absolutely incredible accomplishment that deserves all the accolades. These guys can take, the next decade off if they wanted to. They've certainly deserved it. Of course, they're probably only going to be taking, 2 months off. Number 2. Hudson Lee, Headspaces. And here's a fresh face. This guy hasn't been around that long, and this is actually his debut album. But what an introduction. This guy's bringing really complex sound design with tracks that have lots of change-ups and sidetracks and do whatever the heck they want. Going from strange experimental beats to ambient moments to hard-hitting neurofunk and modern dubstep influences, and stripped-back smooth jazz sections, even some orchestral elements occasionally, sometimes all of these things in the same track. Guy's got an attention to detail on par with artists like B.T. and Coma Duster and Elon Moore. Insane density that led to a listening experience where I would keep discovering new things with every listen. But he's also got a unique flair to his sound that doesn't sound like any of those guys. He's certainly aiming for something a lot smaller scale and more low-key. Much more personal and intimate and maybe more songwriterly, frequently featuring the vocal talents of Lassa Patique, who is on the album so much to the point of it also kind of being her album as well as Lee's. But he also brought in a lot of other talented guest producers and label mates to work with him, like Frequent, False Noise, Vorso, and Elon Moore, and they all bring something special to this album without ever feeling out of place. It's impressive on another level and never feels pretentious or overbearing. This was an album that really took me on a journey throughout the course of the year in more ways than one. While it's not an album that I initially got, and many of the repeat listens I gave it were attempts to figure out how I even felt about it, I didn't get to reviewing it until several months after it came out because I had that much trouble verbalizing my feelings. But I am definitely glad I spent as much time with it as I did, because it did eventually click with me in a big way. In terms of albums sticking with me and I want to be remembered as big highlights of the year and people should not be missing, Headspaces should be my number one pick. It's an album that has me excited for what he and his label mates on Upscale are going to come up with in the new decade and has me looking forward to the future. The only reason it didn't top the list was replay value. And don't get me wrong, I listened to this album a ton over the course of the year. But there was another album that I listened to a lot more than this one. And not to pick it apart and discover new details like on this album, just one I felt like listening to over and over well after I'd finished reviewing it. And this is it. Number 1. The Chemical Brothers, No Geography.
Remember, no geography.
Yeah, I don't typically like going for the obvious pick, but in terms of replay value, No Geography really didn't have any competition this year. It's not one that I expected to be as strong as it was. The Chemical Brothers do not exactly have the most consistent track record in the genre. I didn't even think this album was that fantastic on first listen. When it came out, I had a list of like 20 nitpicks and problems I had with it, and I've heard from people who are really let down by this album, which I can understand to some extent as well. It's not for everyone, I guess. But as I listened to it more and more, I cared less and less about all my initial problems. Tracks that I wasn't feeling before, back when I was reviewing it with Spectrum Pulse, I still can't believe that happened. But yeah, tracks like We've Got to Try and The Universe Sent Me and Mad as Hell and even former least favorite Gravity Drops ended up really warming up on me. And I think it's worth noting that this basically never happens with the Chemical Brothers. Most of their other stuff wears out on me the more I listen to them, even albums I like more than this one, like Push the Button and Dig Your Own Hole. This one got increasingly better with every listen. And the tracks that I already liked from the get-go, like Eve of Destruction and the title track and Gotta Keep On and Free Yourself, didn't lose any of their luster. This album also flows super well, better than most of their stuff, really feels like a cohesive and well-paced album experience. Every track is colorful and interesting, it makes me really want to see them live. And they're all super catchy, too. This is the kind of album that I could basically listen to just in my head in its entirety without actually having it physically playing. No Geography hasn't left my listening rotation at all in the past 12 months, and that includes the time before the album came out and I was getting hyped on the pre-album singles. It's such a freaking great album, one of their absolute best. And in terms of what album most defined my 2019, this felt like the only appropriate number one pick. The Chemical Brothers, No Geography, my favorite album of the year. And yeah, that's the list, but of course this is just my opinion, you can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people, you want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today, see you next year.
And them too. And you. And me too. I'll take you along.